Hey, Chris. So for the viewers, I'm here with Chris VanDeventer. I had the opportunity to go through the Uncivilized Man coaching certification with Chris, and this is where I learned that Chris was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. And I really was excited to learn more and share with everyone that's listening about how he transitioned from this struggling with this to thriving with this. And so, Chris, welcome and thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Alex. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for this space that you're providing for me to feel safe being here and for others to feel safe listening. So
I
super
appreciate
happy
that.
to be here, man.
So Chris, tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, your story, and let's dive deep into this.
Yeah. So like you said, 4 years ago now, I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, and I do, amongst the work I'm doing as a creative person, as a poet, and the work that I've dived into in men's work, I've been picking and choosing where I share that information of that diagnosis. And I think the reason that I've been doing that is because a lot of people don't know what to do with that information. We're taught a lot of things through media and such. And when I'm trying to be a full-time leader in my life, to lead other men into more vulnerability, I do have to wonder if the word bipolar would make a person think, oh, this isn't a person that can lead. This isn't a person I can follow because they're crazy. And it's been a huge lesson for me understanding what that word bipolar does with my life. I was diagnosed for a reason. I've experienced extreme highs, mania, absolute joy, to the point that I lose some of my self-awareness. And I've experienced extreme lows, not being able to get out of bed for days, and ultimately being suicidal and attempting to take my life. The way that I understand bipolar, that anyone can understand, is that we all go through highs and lows. We all go through ebbs and flows in our life, both from external impacts as well as internal. Like when good things happen in our life, we naturally get happier. When bad things happen, we naturally start to struggle a bit more. When our hormones and our energy levels in us go up and go down, we react to both internal and external forces. The way I understand bipolar in a simple view is that this highs and lows is highlighted. It's emphasized. You go a little bit higher, you go a little bit lower. How we take care of ourselves and our body will naturally balance that. How we steady the things that we can control, the external things in our life that we can control, will naturally balance that. So you and I, Alex, we're going through the same story. We have our different versions, obviously. The biggest difference I see is just that depression is around the corner for me. I know it very well. I know you have your own struggles. Sometimes my depression might just be lower because that chemical imbalance is greater for me. But either way, we're both trying to achieve balance in our lives. It's still very important. Like, I know it's important to you, balancing your work life with your family life, being a family man. I know how much that means to you and how much you're working on yourself to find that balance, to allow yourself to get the most out of your life. I'm doing the same thing, and I'm just learning the impact that my highs and lows can have. It can be very strong.
Absolutely. Now, I want to go back 4 years ago. You talked about being diagnosed 4 years ago. Walk me through that time of your life. You know, obviously there were some things that led up to your diagnosis, but how did you cope with learning about this? Take me through all of that.
Yeah. So I'm a believer in extreme vulnerability. I believe it's an adrenaline sport. And so this was right around the time where I started to express myself very vulnerably on social media. And I actually remember uh, I told my girlfriend, my partner at the time, um, but I didn't know how else to express it. And so I turned to social media, and I remember taking a video in my room, super calm, super baseline, just being like, hey, I'm bipolar and everything's good, just getting that out there. And then I posted it and absolutely broke down because saying the words, I am bipolar, I didn't realize how much that was going to affect me and how much my inner dialogue blew up with all the stories I've heard of people being crazy, having bipolar, this, that. And so that was one of my first practices in being super vulnerable online. And I got a good reception from friends and family, mentors, all this, and people that I still hear mention it sometimes when someone's acting out, when someone's being highly emotional or something, we don't know how to explain their actions. It slips out sometimes. I don't know. Maybe they're bipolar or something. And when I'm not on top of my understanding, it really does impact me. And I think, how can I do this? How can I find balance? How can I lead people when I have had periods in my life of being so low? That time that when I got diagnosed, I was coming out of a crazy summer where I had lost my self awareness in spending a ton of money and partying a lot. And the low was just coming on, where I look back at what I've done and I start labeling everything I've done as being a failure. And I started turning to that diagnosis when I was low as a way to beat myself up even more. When it got down to it, and I had all these like pretty potent medications that were meant to balance me out, I saw them as a way to relieve some of the pain I was feeling. I remember waking up on a Tuesday morning. Just that Friday night, I'd been at the bar with my friend telling him about how great I was doing. Now that I had this diagnosis, I had a better understanding, which is true. But at the time, I was still taking on all the negative connotations around it. And I woke up Tuesday morning and just felt this absolute low. It was like I gained 200 pounds overnight. I was so heavy, couldn't lift my head up anymore. I was so ashamed of who I was. I wouldn't have lifted my head up even if I could. And that was a time where the low hit so hard, so fast that I thought there was only one way out. And I ended up overdosing on those medications. And thankfully ended up getting to the hospital that night and recovering, but the wall went up, the shield went up, and I wanted to pretend I was okay again. And by the next morning, I was still so high off the drugs and the effects of it that I couldn't walk from the medication that I'd overdosed on. I couldn't walk, but I still managed to convince the psychiatrist, to let me go. And so they had to wheelchair me out of the hospital just so I could get a ride home. Telling one, like 10 hours after I tried to take my life, I was already trying to convince people I was okay again. because there's still this innate thing in me of when I'm absolutely struggling, this idea that I can't ask for help is so strong. That's where I relate to other men. I don't think it matters what your diagnosis is. So many of us have that deep in us. And I'm like, how can we get that out? How can we get rid of that idea that I don't need, or I'm not deserving of help when I'm struggling?
That's a very powerful message, and something that stuck out to me. And I told you the statistic on this because you correlated this to men in general, right? 21% of U.S. adults, and this is not just men, but this is women and men, which is about 52.9 million people in 2020, struggled with a mental health condition. So I understand that we're talking about bipolar here, and this is just a general mental health condition. And that's from NAMI.org. And then the other statistics that I gathered that was really, really powerful to me is that the CDC put 50% of the society will at some point in their life struggle with a mental health condition. And I throw statistics out there, not as like, oh, you're doomed or whatever the case, may be, but that this is possibly a very common, mental health is very common that people struggle with. And so I wanted to ask you, what was the toughest thing? What was the toughest situation or whatever kept coming up for you during this process from 4 years ago all the way up until now? Like, what has been the toughest thing for you?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit. Like I was using it to beat myself even more when I was low. Because there's this misunderstanding around different mental health diagnoses, like you just named it, like 50 something million people, and we can't toss 50 million people and say, oh, they're crazy. Like everybody knows someone. Like when I brought it up prior on the call, you knew someone. Like it affects all of us, whether you are one of the 50 million people that have this diagnosis with a mental health struggle, or you just know someone. And so we're all learning to deal with this. And I would take it and use it to beat myself up more and to put myself down into like a self-shame cycle. It really feeds my imposter syndrome. I'm a certified man uncivilized coach, as you mentioned now, and I've been sitting with my imposter syndrome. I think I have the evidence that I can help other men because I'm doing it. And yet when I get into that imposter syndrome, which so many of us know, we're trying something new, we're trying on a new bodysuit, like it's not always going to fit perfect at the start because it's new to us. But I get that voice in my head, like, you are bipolar, Chris. What happens when you're in a low? We just went through me and you, we just went through a 12-week leadership and coaching program together. And through those 12 weeks, I probably went through 2 pretty heavy lows. They were more based on external. I had a business that wasn't working out well. I had some family stuff. Those external factors hit me really hard, and I had a couple weeks of lows, and I still showed up. Like, that has been, and I'm sure we're going to get more into this, but that has played a huge role in my transformation. Like, taking no matter what's going on for you, just show up. Like, sometimes I can show up and run a half marathon. Like, sometimes I run 100 kilometers a week. I don't know what that is in miles, sorry, brother. And I work out at 6 days a week and I feel fucking great. And other times it's like, all right, can you get on this coaching call for an hour and go for a walk today? And that's what you're going to do. But I'm getting rid of the beating myself up aspect and turning to a more compassionate approach.
And it is truly remarkable to see that transformation in the 12 weeks that we were going through those courses. And and I mentioned this to you before we got on the call, but like when I say thriving with this condition, I am fully aware that it's not, there's not always going to be highs, right? It's like hills, but understanding that your coping mechanisms, the people you put yourself around, the things that you do to take care of yourself when you're having those lows, to have more highs than lows is what I mean by that. And when you were talking, something that came to mind to me, I was getting my haircut today, and I was overhearing two women talking. One woman was talking about her husband, and that he was very depressed. He just learned that he's not going to be able to work again, and that he's just going through a hard time. And I sat there and I was just listening, and I was like, man, what is the best thing for that man, any man? And it initially came to mind, and you said it right. We cannot do this alone. The time of the lone wolf is no longer there. Surrounding yourself with other men doing the work is going to help you grow and help you understand what you're going through. And so I want to go back and highlight something that you mentioned earlier, because I really do think that it's something that helps you. You talked about your expressive nature, and I just love it when I see it on Instagram. Tell me how poetry and your creative side has helped you navigate through this.
Yeah, so good question. First of all, like, totally agree, we can't do this alone. I experienced that. I'm amazed that I made a little bit of progress on my own, but it was very incomplete. I could make progress during my highs when I was alone. I felt a bit of pride, false pride in being a lone wolf. But when I got back to those lows, it was right back to the bottom, because I didn't have anyone to help support me. And so I totally agree with that. I was a closeted poet until about 2 years ago. I denied the idea that I could have some creative energy in me, because I was too busy trying to fit a label of what I thought a real man was. And it got to the point where I felt such a calling, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had written this poem about masculinity, and I needed to share it. And as soon as I shared it once, it was terrible. I was shaking. I hadn't done public speaking before. It only took a few people of telling me, like, the world needs to hear this. You understand that, right? And so I was able to challenge myself to the point of, like, at that point, I didn't know what it would do for me, but I told myself, well, if the world needs to hear this, if there's men that need to hear this, I need to do that service of putting it out there. And then once I started sharing poetry on social media, especially my spoken word poetry, and realized it was creating connection, like, I'd have people message me about what it meant for them. We'd start having conversations about it. I'd get to reveal more parts of myself. They'd reveal parts of them. We'd come together in the idea of wanting to make this safer, more lovable world. I would feel a high that didn't hurt anyone, a high that had no negative consequences, a high that was forming connection with myself and others. And since then, I leaned into poetry. I started writing every day. When I'm feeling good, I write about the things I wonder, my curiosities in the world. When I'm feeling low, I write about how terrible I feel. And it's a tool to like get some of this emotion moving, to get something out of me. Sometimes it sounds really cool. That's just the plus now. It's like I write to keep my emotions moving, to keep analyzing where I'm at, and to keep working on balancing myself. And then sometimes it comes out and it's like, whoa, that sounds cool. Okay, now I've got a poem. Now I got something that I'm going to share with the world. And I've been honored by how it's being received. So much positivity. So many people that are, for whatever reason, I'm truly humbled. For whatever reason, people resonate with the words that come out of my mouth, and I feel more connected when that happens.
I can tell you this from firsthand experience, like you impacted my life by your poetry. I remember when we first met each other and we were going through this, and I started following you on Instagram. I didn't know how powerful just getting your thoughts on a piece of paper were. And I started to do poetry myself. And I have some poetry that I haven't published to the world. There's some that I did. But I realize when I don't write or I don't get those thoughts out, I don't feel as well as when I do. And then just the power of that speaks volumes. I have videos just like, watching your videos of doing poetry, and how I remember when I first did those videos, how shaky I was. But then afterwards, I was like, I feel so good. I started to scream more on camera. I love you taught me the just let it out, right? So the big lions roar.
Yeah.
I guess I say all that not for a plug, but I mentioned this to you earlier, but you're having a creative writing class June 12th it's free, you're open to the public, they can sign up on your Instagram, and that's when you're going to really dive deeper into your poetry.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very excited for it. I'm going to be sharing one of the techniques that I use often for when I have a feeling I don't know what to do with, or a memory I don't know what to do with, anxiety I don't know what to do with. I got a simple technique that I use to write it all down. And sometimes, if we're honored enough, it turns into a poem, which is awesome. And it's like people don't need a creative baseline. They just have to bring themselves. That's it.
Okay.
And a little bit of a willingness to be vulnerable helps. You can show up however you are.
Well, I know I'm excited to join. I'm going to sign up and attend to that. And I don't want to get too much off topic, because poetry does have a play into what you do now with your coaching and things of that nature. Tell me what you do. So I know we haven't got to the question of like, what did you do to shift the narrative? But I want to know, what do you do to cope now? Like, so let me take back. What did you do to cope before poetry and before surrounding yourself with other men and things of that nature?
Before that happened, I didn't have a great coping system. I was learning to create more wholeness in my life. I have a phrase I go by: seek the goodness in every day. SEEK is an acronym, SEECC, sleep, eat, exercise, create, connect. That's a way to remind myself to take care of myself. And so that has really helped me on a day-to-day basis. I got to the point where I knew if I was low enough, I had to go to the crisis center to drop in and talk to a counselor. And I was going to therapy regularly. And this long process of transformation took a giant step when I met Traver Boehm and I joined a men's community. because there was this piece that was missing the whole time I was healing myself. I went to a wellness retreat about 4 years ago, around the same time after this diagnosis. And I remember sitting in a big circle and seeing a man about my father's age cry like a baby and bawl his eyes out. And I was so uncomfortable. Half of it was I was feeling, through empathy, I was feeling half of the hurt he was feeling. I was feeling broken. I was feeling 6 years old. The other half of the discomfort was like, because it wasn't normal for me. I could count on one hand how many times I'd see a grown man cry in my life. I was like, what? This happened? I was so uncomfortable with the idea of that. I was like, get me out of here. Fast forward 4 years later, I'm now in a men's community. I'm getting on calls with other men a few times a week. Sometimes I cry, sometimes they cry. That piece, that men's community, has saved my life in a whole new level.
So let's talk about that for a second. And this leads to my next question. At what point did you say enough is enough? I need to shift the narrative and change the outcome of my life?
That's a good question. I said that a few times. It doesn't always work right away. I've written that chaos and change both start the same. So sometimes when we're in absolute chaos, that's when the change becomes most necessary. That's when we really get the chance to look at ourselves in the mirror and go, you got to do something about this. I was constantly coming back to a place of being suicidal, of contemplating if I try to live another day or if I give in to these suicidal thoughts. And I was in a point of chaos when I asked, maybe this isn't the question I want to be facing every day. Maybe I want to be convincing myself, constantly providing myself with evidence of why my life is worth living. Instead of sitting with the question, is it worth living or not? I'm going to take a stance here. I'm going to say it is worth living. And I'm going to start providing myself with reasons to back that up. That and jumping into vulnerability, people ask me sometimes, how can you do that? Or they say, I could never do something like that. That's like the scariest thing in the world to me, is like stepping up on a stage, which I've done sometimes, or getting behind the camera and speaking your like true deepest self. That's terrifying. How could you do that? I'm like, yeah, it is terrifying. That's the scariest thing for me too. I got told once, if you want to feel alive, do what truly scares you. So that's what I'm doing. I'm not doing this because it's easy. So I'm like, oh, it's easy for me to get up on stage. It's easy for me to spit out all these terrifying things about myself, the shameful things I've done in my life. I'm doing this because it helps me feel more alive.
If you had one piece of advice, and I know this is a tough question, but if you had one piece of advice for yourself 4 years ago, or anybody else that's going through bipolar 2 disorder, what would it be?
Slow down. Slow down. Of all the self-care tools that we often hear, exercise, I try to exercise daily, has an amazing effect. Eat healthy food, create connections, talk about it, all these positive things. Meditation is what I have felt the most drawn away from. Like, I don't want to do that. And it has been the most helpful.
There's a saying that I tell people: where there's resistance, there's growth, right? And I expand even more and say, with growth comes connection to self, and with connection to self comes happiness. And I always remind myself, when something is like when I feel that resistance, I try to open up, I look inward, and I try to open up even more, because I feel like that's the biggest opportunity for growth.
I completely agree with that. And coming back to the meditation, it's like I've gone through periods of deep isolation in my life, and I am naturally a person of solitude. I like to spend a lot of time by myself when I'm feeling good and bad. And so I'm like, why would I want to meditate and just sit alone with my thoughts? I'm with my thoughts all the time. But when I do it with intention, like you're saying, I'm like going deeper into that, and then I sit with my thoughts and I start observing them in meditation. I fight through that anxiety that's telling me to stop, and then sometimes it just slows right down, and all of a sudden I can actually observe my thoughts. I can see them without applying guilt or shame. I can better understand myself, gain self-awareness. Oh, this is why I'm acting this way. This is why I'm doing this. What do I really want here? I just need to slow down. And that seems so hard sometimes when I'm frantic, when we're in a high, and we just want that momentum to keep going and keep going. If we don't slow ourselves down, life will. Sometimes we got to learn it the hard way. I keep learning it the hard way. So to lean in to that discomfort when I'm on my own, to just sit down and meditate, let my thoughts slow down. The growth is immeasurable.
What do you do now to cope? You shifted the narrative. You've taken back. I use the term taking back your life. You surrounded yourself with this men's group, which I am a firm believer in. I'm full on board. I got the tattoo. Like I go to try to get as many retreats as I can. Like, I'm with you, man. Like Traver Boehm, if you're listening and you're trying to look for a movement, the Uncivilized Nation is the movement that I really encourage you to look into. It's not for all, but it's something that people should look into. Tell me what you do to cope now when you feel like you're having a down day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that men's community has been so helpful for me. I do have, like, the last larger low I had a few weeks ago. I lost a day or two sitting in my pain, sitting in my darkness alone, not moving through it. But that time, the first thing I did was reached out to a guy that I'd met through the Uncivilized Nation, and got on a call, and we talked about this pain. We related over the feeling that there's a black hole in me, something that I cannot fill, and accepting that. Now when I'm sitting at home and my emotions are overwhelming me, and I can't find the words, I turn to physical exercise. I go for a run. I do 100 push-ups. When I'm feeling so low, like the effect that health struggles have on me is that sometimes I can do 100 push-ups in a day, and like I said, sometimes I can barely get out of bed. So I'm reasonable with that, and other times it's going for a walk because that's what I'm capable of, but I know I still need to get that physical exercise. I reach out to people. Generally now it's men because I have that safe space. I exercise and I write. The first thing I ever wrote in a journal when I was 18, and I heard that writing helps you better analyze your thoughts. The first words I wrote down were, "I want to kill myself." And by the end of the page, I wanted to kill myself a little bit less. Nothing had changed. I was just getting it out. Energy, in motion, emotions. Keep moving. Slow down and keep going.
That's the biggest thing that I've learned recently is when I'm frustrated, or like you mentioned, like you just don't know what, like how to get it out. I've resorted to push-ups, and I've resorted to, while I'm doing push-ups, like I just grunt like ah ah, and I know that my wife has looked at me and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" But I can do a lot more push-ups. Try this at home if you're listening, and I encourage you to do it, Chris. Like when you're doing push-ups, just grunt, and I'm telling you, you're gonna be able to do more push-ups than you would think. And when you're done, you're feeling amazing. You're feeling better. I'll use the term better, right? Because everybody feels something different. But I feel like you feel better because you just got some built up energy, like you said, out of your body.
Yeah, I'll get into it. I'll do the grunts for sure. I'll let you know how it goes.
So I haven't done this with my other two guests, but I'm just going off the cusp here. I just talk for a minute, 2 minutes about anything that you want. Could be mental health related. I just want to give you the floor on anything that you'd like to address.
That's a good question, man. Yeah, I was mentioning slow down and keep going. And there's so much confusion in that. To some people, it seems like a contradiction. Finding balance. We're talking about all these little self-care things of doing push-ups or getting some exercise or journaling a little bit. And we hear these things over and over and over again. When you're first looking for change, when you're in chaos, when you're struggling, and you go out and you start looking into personal development, self-growth and stuff. And I used to get so frustrated. It's like, I need change. Like I need transformation, and you're asking for all these little things. And it's hard to get through to someone like to Alex from 9 months ago when he's facing all these massive life challenges. And it's like, well, just do some push-ups, just do some writing, because it's the continuity of these little things that are going to create the transformation. Like we've talked about specific moments. I've talked about getting diagnosed. I'm talking about seeing another man cry for one of the first times, meeting a person that has had a massive effect. But it's the continuation of all these little things that allow us to see transformation over time, because I'm still the same person. I'm still the person that struggles. I still get to points of feeling so low that I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I feel disconnected. I don't feel worthy of change. And doing these little things over time help us get through those big periods, those dark periods. It's just such a common thing. We talk about all these time, these transformational moments, but those transformational moments would be nothing if I went back to doing the same daily habits that I had been doing before. I had to change the little things. And that's why it's, for me, it's slow down and keep going, because it's not like have this big experience and then your life changes forever. It's have this big experience, go back to focusing on what you can control daily, these small things, these responses rather than reactions, doing push-ups instead of taking it out on a loved one, like those little things that build up, that create our transformations. They don't just happen. We have to create them over time.
Yeah, and I tie this back. Everything that the way we react to things is conditioned behavior. And so like that, the great thing about conditioned behavior is that it can be done undone, right? And so when what I take away from what you said, consistency over time equals trust. Shout out to Robert Wunderlich for that quote. And that you have the ability to play with what you're dealing with to undo the conditions that were put on you. And I think that, like you said, sitting with yourself, understanding what you're going through, and doing those little things, you're still you, but you're transforming over that period of time.
Exactly.
Tell me, or we'll tell the listeners, how can they get in touch with you? So I know you're doing this June 12th poetry class. Let's talk about that, the master class. Talk about how they can reach out to you if what your message resonated with them, how they could get on a phone call with you, etc.
Well, first of all, I will tell you, Alex, that if you need to get a hold of me, you've got my number and you can call me anytime.
Absolutely.
Because I'm with you and I've got your back.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you, brother.
And for people listening, if you've resonated at all with this conversation, the next big thing is my self-growth poetry workshop on June 12th, like you mentioned. You can it's free. You can register through my website, www.becomingchristopher.com, or through my Instagram, which is @becomingchristopher. If you're a man specifically, or anyone listening that is near the beginning of their journey diving into self-growth, and you're wondering who to follow, I would suggest to follow the people that you resonate with the most, that you feel the most emotion around, not necessarily the people that it's like, well, they seem to be saying the right things. Because it's easy to drone out the right things. But when you find a person that is meeting you where you're at, that you check out their content and you feel what they're going through, and it can help you along your path, that's where I think that we're gonna be able to stick with it. Yeah, following people that you resonate with, that bring emotion out in you, based around good intentions of healing and learning more about ourselves, I think is the bigger focus, rather than just like becoming our own therapist, learning all the right things. That's how I think that we can be on our path and keep moving forward, because we have to enjoy ourselves along the journey.
Absolutely. And I just want to put this out there as well. I just want to say I thank you, because you've inspired me just from our short time being together. If everything that you put out resonates, everything that you just being you and being authentic, being vulnerable, has inspired me to really open up and share my story, and reach out to other men to share their stories. That's what a man's journey was, what came about, was because I wanted to really hear other men's stories on how they shifted from being unconscious to conscious, so to speak. And there's the journey along the way. It's not always highs, and it's not always lows, but what they did, what you did, to be able to live a better, authentic, fulfilled life. And I just want to say thank you for that. And thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like seeing the part of your journey that I've been seeing honors me, and to the point where you've got this podcast now where you're going to be introducing the people that are making an impact on your life. I'm so thankful to be just one man walking alongside you on your journey. And I'm going to keep watching you grow. I'm going to keep growing into myself more, being more and more authentic. I don't know exactly where that leads me, but I know I'm on the path.
I love you, brother.
Love you too, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.